This week on London Real, we have the international speaker and web psychologist, Nathalie Nahai.
You can't retract your data once it's out there. A lot of the things that we do online, we do unthinkingly. Sex interferes with decision making. Women and men tend to trust women more. I've actually come off Facebook because I don't agree with most of the dark patterns that they use. The person that you are now is not the person you were 5, 10, 15 years ago. You can reinvent yourself. Give less of a fuck, have fun, don't take life too seriously.
London Real presents Nathalie Nahai, web psychologist.
Be smart, you can figure this out.
And we are back. I'm coming at you from the mean streets of Shoreditch, and I wanted to hit you with this piece of street art that's right across from my studios, and it looks like we got E.T. here, and it says, "You call it God, we call it a prank." And I'm trying to think about this. I had Guy Kawasaki here the other day, and I was like, "What do you think that means?" And he was like, "I don't know." And I'm like, "Is that life?" Or I'm not quite sure what's going on. So there you go, always making us introspective when you walk around here in Shoreditch with some of the art, and just really fortunate to have all these people that are expressing themselves and putting it on the walls. I will have a street artist on soon, and someone that talks a bit more about some of the art that's created for free for me near my studio. So there you go. This week on the show, we have web psychologist and author Nathalie Nahai, and this lady's fascinating because she breaks down why a lot of the tricks work for us on the web and what we're looking for, why we respond. And I asked her tons of questions about like Facebook and the notifications button, because I just spent time with Ty Lopez, and he was talking about the guy that created some of those buttons on Facebook and how those guys should be worth $1 billion, and how we always go for these little bits of dopamine. And I'm also reading a book called Hooked right now, which talks about all of these different tactics they can use to hook you on the web. And one of them that's fascinating is called variable reward. And it's not something we think about, but if you don't know the reward you're gonna get when you log on to something, then that actually likes it. Our monkey brains like that. So sometimes you go on Twitter and you're bored. Sometimes you go on there and you see something fun. And sometimes you go on there and you see something upset. So this all hooks us, you know, into being. And maybe we do that on London Real too. Sometimes you tune in to get ayahuasca, and then sometimes you get a UFC fighter, and then sometimes you get an activist, and sometimes you get George Galloway, and you're like, "Oh, Jesus, Brian." So if you have complaints about the guests, that's just my way of hooking you, perhaps. So there you go. Nathalie has a lot of great ideas, and I think it's fascinating to talk about the stuff that influences the way we behave, and it's good to get it out in the open and find out, you know, why we do the things that we do. So more will be coming on about that, and obviously that ties into the cognitive biases and all the great stuff that Ty talks about too. So there you go. I think you're really going to enjoy this show. I just want to thank the weather for stopping to rain. I wasn't quite sure how we were going to do this this pre-roll, but I want to let you know that we are brought to you by the fantastic folks at Bulletproof. And if you're not sure who they are, these are the guys that make the coffee I drink every day. And I just had some this morning. I gave some to Matthew Pritchard from Dirty Sanchez. I gave some to Haley Quinn last night, the international relationship expert, and everyone loves it. So you must check it out. I've also been having the Bulletproof Unfair Advantage, and the book is out now, The Bulletproof Diet. So there's so many great products there. Big fans of Dave Asprey and everything they do, and they have been big supporters of this podcast. So send love to them, and you will be sending love to me. And there you go. I also want to say that you only get one chance to make a first impression, and that online is your website. And I always check each one of my guests' websites out, and even when I'm going to book guests, I sometimes see what they're all about. And if you have a lousy site, you're probably not on my show. And so it might be time to step up your game. And if you do, I suggest you use the folks at Squarespace, which is an all-in-one platform for making your website or online portfolio look the best. And it works great. It's, I must say, we have a beautiful looking site. People really like it. They find it easy to find, simple, and it's all brought to you by those guys. They have like Squarespace 7 has all these new designs, and even my better half the lady in my life who is so cool to cook for me every day. She's got her cooking blog up there, all Squarespace, and she drags and drops and she's loving it. So if you want to check her out, it's mygourmetjournal.com, and she's doing it all via Squarespace. So there you go. Thanks to those guys. If you want to get 10% off, use the code London, and you can even try it out for free. So do that. I'm walking by the guys at Bull Rocket, and that's the Bull Rocket behind me. That's my man Andrew Tarver. You would have seen him on Silicon Reel, and they run a great shop there. It's not really, they just have tons of great tech ideas that he promotes. And so just some of the cool stuff happening in Shoreditch. I'm always glad to be here. Always so colorful. So there you go. I'm going to wrap this one up, but you've probably been hearing me alluding to the big project and partnership coming up, and it is happening. So keep your ears tuned. I'm going to be having a few videos coming out soon. They're going to talk about what we're going to do. It's super exciting. In the meantime, give us your email so we can get you in touch, and in the meantime, get you in touch with all of our extra content, all of my special videos. Please subscribe here, and you're going to get all of my little videos. I've been releasing like my day in the life videos of all the people I kind of hang out during the week, and I've been surprised. I actually hang out with a lot of cool people. So if you want to be involved with that, please do, and subscribe. We're just trying to get all that stuff happening. So there you go. When you hear this, I will be in Los Angeles out there for the Ty Lopez conference. So I'll be trying to do some interviews out there. But in the meantime, enjoy Nathalie Nahai. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Nathalie Nahai, who is a web psychologist and author of the best-selling book, Webs of Influence, The Psychology of Online Persuasion. You are an international speaker and trainer whose clients include eBay, Harvard Business Review, Unilever, and Google. You are also a resident columnist at Marketing Week and are currently writing your second book. Nathalie, welcome to London Real.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. There's so much to talk about. The term web psychologist, you know, of course, it hit me when I was seeing some of your stuff. It might have been via Twitter or via maybe Jamie Bartlett had tweeted something about you. And so it's interesting right away. So very good marketing on your part. You know, there's a passage I think is part of your new book, and I just want to quote it and get your thoughts on it. So here we go. Quote, most of the decisions we make online aren't the product of any thoughtful reasoning, but rather the result of a carefully orchestrated series of steps deployed by companies to grab your attention, access your data, and ensnare your custom. That's a powerful statement. This doesn't sound like a positive future. What are you trying to say there, Nathalie?
I think what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the things that we do online, we do unthinkingly. And when you're looking at a medium that makes it so easy for you to take unthinking, reactive decisions, and the consequence of which can be things like revealing all this information that reveals personal, intimate stuff about ourselves, we really need to be careful about our level of literacy about what we're doing online, why we're doing it, and who's getting that information, so that essentially we get empowered by choice. And that's crucially what the book is about, is empowering people to make an actual choice based on knowledge that they have, rather than getting duped.
You know, my guest last week, I think I was telling you about him, Ty Lopez, he said whoever invented the notification button on Facebook should be a billionaire, because it gives you those little bits of dopamine every single time that you see something change. It's just like we've all gotten addicted to the Twitter feed. Sometimes I catch myself when I'm like doing important work, researching for a wonderful guest like you, and all of a sudden I'll find myself on Twitter and I'm like, there's no reason to be here, and I'll have to trick my brain into going back. How much is that the case, those kind of little bits of dopamine that have now been engineered to really draw our attention, something that didn't happen 1,000 years ago or 100 years ago?
Well, what's interesting with the dopamine patterning, if you look at any system that's been designed to elicit habitual or, in certain cases, addictive patterns of behavior. So, for instance, you know, you go gambling and you've got the slot machines and you're waiting for a prize to come. The most effective pattern for that to elicit the most amount of cash from your customers is called a variable ratio of reinforcement or reward. Basically, all that means is you know you're going to get a prize, you just don't know when it's going to come or how big it's going to be. And it's the same thing with push notifications or emails or anything where you're kind of engaged in a system that's going to give you some kind of reward. So, for instance, getting an email that's a request for an interview or an article that gets loads of likes, all of these things are rewarding to us, and they initiate sort of these dopamine spikes. But the more unpredictable these rewards become, hence on Twitter feeds while we're scrolling down for the good bit, or on Facebook, whatever, the more we're likely to engage in that behavior to get more of those rewards, which ends up causing what's sometimes called a dopamine loop. So you're constantly seeking that hit.
So it's the variability of that dopamine hit that keeps us addicted to it.
It's the variability of the reward, so you don't know when it's going to become...
or how big it's going to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating. I remember the 60 Minutes had an article or an episode about slot machines. It was like a few years ago, and they showed in Vegas they had these like super slot machines where you would risk $1 and get like 75 cents back and 50 cents back, or $1.25, and people would do it all day. And I remember thinking like that makes no sense to me mentally. But now that I see our online platforms, I can now see that happening in real time, and I can see it happening to most people, and it's crazy. I mean, we think we're smart enough to avoid it, but we can't, right?
It's very tricky, and I think we were talking a little bit before in the kitchen about figuring out what the biases are that are likely to trip us up, and then working that to our advantage. So, for instance, I have a friend who's a lawyer in the States who, for a period of a month, he went on a trial where he put everything that had notifications on his phone, so every app, to the last page of his apps. So when he opens up his phone in the morning, he doesn't see any notifications. So essentially what he's doing is removing the stimulus, removing the trigger point, so that when he decides he wants to check his emails, he can then scroll through and it's in his control. So techniques like that, or Nir Eyal, who's written a fantastic book called Hooked, which is about the positive aspect of creating habit-forming behaviors in products and services and their ethical deployment. He talks about how in his home he puts the router up on a massive height so that when he comes home in the evening and he's there with his wife and his kid, he can actually go and switch it off. And then it's such a big physical challenge to switch it back on again that you're kind of stopping that initial sort of reactive, I quickly just want to check my emails, whatever.
Right. When I first heard about it, I think Tim Ferriss mentioned the 4-hour work week and information diet. And I remember I stopped because he said he checked his email once a day, and he trained all of his clients and friends to know that he only did that and not to expect responses. And I did it for a long time. I wouldn't check it until noon, and it was like a real discipline. And then I would choose to do it and then not be dominated. And now when I go home, I turn all my push notifications off. So it's either I get a phone call when I know, actually when I get a phone call, something's wrong.
Yeah.
So like whenever my phone rings, I'm like, uh-oh, because people know not to call me because I've trained them that, that's not the way to get to me. But it's hard. I mean, I unplugged for like a week a few months ago. I was up in Scotland, and I just realized how nice it was to just be in a room alone and not be constantly checking something.
Yeah.
And then I realized that it really was just an addiction. It wasn't me trying to be informed.
Yeah. It's this sense of kind of needing to feel connected. And I think that's one of the biggest sort of benefits and pitfalls of the web, is a sense of wanting to be connected all the time, not wanting to miss out, having that innate curiosity that makes us seek out knowledge. But again, if it's immediate gratification and it's quite a surface level thing, it can diminish our ability for deeper experience. So the other thing that I noticed personally, I spent 3 weeks away on a honeymoon last year in the jungle and in the Galapagos, so there was no Wi-Fi, so nothing for 3 weeks. It was amazing. And one of the things that I noticed was my perception of time completely changed. So in a day-to-day life, when I'm writing, I'll do 45-minute stint, everything's off apart from what I'm doing. But the rest of the time is really fragmented. It's these little packets of time, so you can never really kind of get into anything. Or if you go out for dinner and they've got their phone on the table, it's always in the back of your mind. And research has been found that actually if you have a phone there, you won't end up reaping the rewards of a deeper connection, of better conversation. So it's a good experiment to run to see how your experience of day-to-day life shifts when you get that out of the way for a few periods, sort of days or weeks, whatever.
So you wrote your first book, and it was kind of delving into some of these dark tricks and secrets about the web, and then your information got hijacked by the corporates, and they used it for their own means. Is this an accurate summary of what happened? And now your next book is to apologize and rework what you set in motion. Is that a fair summary? Or
here's the thing, because I'm kind of treading this weird line. So the thing that I found, it's not that corporates hijack the information, because some of them do really good work, but there is an ethical debate to be had. So a lot of the companies that I work with do good work and they deploy stuff ethically, but there are equal numbers, if not more, who use things like dark patterns to manipulate people or dupe people into making choices that don't serve them. And I was increasingly becoming aware of this sort of rift. There's a fantastic guy who's set up darkpatterns.org. His name's Harry Brignall, who's got a short 30-minute video on some of these things if you're interested in sort of exploring that a bit more. But with the first book, the idea actually was to take all this research that other people have done the institutions have done, you know, from UX to social psychology to persuasive technology, and put them in a format that people could access. So not just the little people or the SMEs, but also the large companies, just so we're all on the same playing field. Because if you make this knowledge public, then we can all realize what's being done and what's out there, and we're all on the same sort of level playing field. I think my issue is when the public don't know about it, and with the first book, it was very much a business book, and the next one's going to be about sort of highlighting the social engineering and covert strategies that are used against us and what positive and negative impacts it has on our autonomy and free will.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that. Talk to me about privacy versus personalization. I've been experiencing it heavy with Google Now, and so I decided to kind of let Google Now into my life, and now it tracks like everywhere I go. I saw my like 30-day geography pattern the other day, and it was like all these lines around London, and I was like, wow. And then it starts to read my emails and then give me reminders. Like it read my email that I had an Addison Lee car booked, and then it was like, we put that in your calendar. I hope that's okay. And I was like, that's okay, but that's a little weird. So obviously there's this balance here. Where do you stand on that? Where shouldn't we go? You don't seem like you're a fan of Google Now. You don't do that. Do you encrypt your emails? Some of my guests do.
I encrypt not my emails. Well, it depends on, and this is, again, it's like how long is a piece of string? I think personally, there are certain things that I don't want to share and other things that I do. I think the key issue is realizing what services are sharing about you and what they're not sharing about you. So, for instance, with things like Uber being in the press about being part owned by Google and then being able to sort of track where journalists are going and the relationship between privacy and personalization and free speech. The idea really, if you're starting to look at research and how any of this kind of information can be pieced together to get a deeper, richer, and more conscious understanding of you than you have of yourself, that's when we get into difficulty. And I think my issue primarily with privacy versus personalization is that we don't yet have the choice. We don't actually know what people are doing with our data. You can't retract your data once it's out there. And some of the pieces that have been coming out recently, there was a piece in the Telegraph that I spoke with them about from last year that was done at Cambridge University about how you can use your Facebook likes to extrapolate all sorts of information about yourself. So whether you're gay or straight, your levels of openness or extroversion, whether your parents are married or divorced, how likely you are to take recreational drugs, all of these things that you might not even tell your closest friends. What happens when that data gets given to a company or to the public domain, and suddenly you've got insurance companies saying, well, we've noticed that people who have these traits, who do drugs, who are high, you know, in openness, whatever, have these kinds of negative life outcomes, therefore we're going to charge a premium.
Maybe they should charge a premium.
Maybe they should, but is that fair? Is that not fair? It's a debate that needs to be had.
Women drivers in the US have less premiums because they get in less accidents. Is that fair or not?
I don't know, but that's the question that needs to be raised, but very few people are raising it.
Right,
so,
true. Did you see the movie Her?
Yes. Yeah.
What'd you think?
I loved it.
I loved it too. Her, if you don't know it, well, go watch it. But he basically has an OS, and this is kind of the Google Now of the future that really almost does things for him. And it's fascinating, but in a weird way, sometimes I want one of those because but it's a little scary. But they would do all of these things for me. They would connect all these bridges. They would be like, Natalie knows Jamie, and Jamie knows this guy, and that would be a great guest for London Real. I'd be like, oh, thanks. What did you learn from that movie? Was it just entertainment, or is it where we're going?
I think what I found the most powerful about it was that it painted a very different portrait of the future. So you've got books like Circle by Dave Eggers, which is a very dystopian look as to how unified identity and privacy and surveillance sort of reaches crazy heights, and so you can't go anywhere in the world untracked. That's sort of a dystopian idea. Or you've got kind of the utopian one of, well, isn't it great? You streamline everything. Your life is made really easy. But with Her, it kind of took it to that different place, which is, well, what if we're interested in creating this technology? It serves us, and then it buggers off because it's more interested, because it's so much more intelligent that it outstrips. We give birth, or we create something which is, in a sense, superior to our own intelligence. And then what does that mean once it takes on a life of its own? So, the idea of the singularity. And I didn't see that coming, and I like those sorts of things.
Yeah, I didn't either. I mean, it's kind of happening now if you think of the way that our, social medias are, tricking us with these responses. I mean, if you were an alien looking down, you would be like, well, who's running things? Look at these people doing this all the time. I loved it when he asked her in the movie, he's like, so how many people do you love? And I was like, oh, here we come. And she's like, what, 26,000 or something? And I was like, oh, Jesus. So yeah, I mean, that was interesting. But let me ask you a few other questions. There's something that you talked about. I saw you in an interview. You talked about something called trust cues that will when we go to an online experience. And I thought that was fascinating because it all happens at a deeply subconscious level, a lot of these things, especially even when we meet people. Okay, that's a human. It's, what do they say? 93% is visual, the communication, and whatever, verbal, and whatever. I mean, so what are some of these things that you've noticed? Because they must have been more advanced over the last 5 years. What are trust cues? Should we watch out for them, or should we just acquiesce?
Okay, so trust cues are basically cues that we look to decide whether or not someone is going to pose a threat to us or not. So there's a lot of figures that are bandied about, and people go, oh, 95% is non-verbal and blah, blah, blah. We don't know what the percentages are. I've done a lot of research around it. We're sort of reading other people's papers and things. But there are lots of things that we rely on that aren't the words that we use. So things like, if you're looking just at vocals, the pitch, how fast someone's speaking, whether it's using specific nuanced language or slang that we're familiar with, whether we're mirroring each other. Like when I first met you today, we got into rapport quite quickly, and I noticed that we had similar body language. So all of these sorts of things that naturally in a face-to-face...
Were you analyzing me the whole time? Jesus.
No, not at all. Okay. But you do kind of, it's one of those things when you meet someone for the first time, hopefully it's going to be a comfortable experience because you want to sort of dig deep quickly. And so that's one of the things you can look for as well. How do I feel? Do I feel comfortable? Do they feel comfortable? And when you're looking online for trust cues, if you have specifically within videos, if you've got the potential, like in these interviews, to assess, is this person relaxed? Is their eye contact good? Then that's going to give you a very strong first impression as to whether or not you can trust that person.
Many of my fans want to watch the first minute or two of the guest, and then they'll switch to audio because they just want to see. I guess they're looking for all those things, right?
Yeah, and also to match the voice to the person and see whether their clothes match their preferences. And I think when you're looking at stuff that's not in movement, so for instance, photos, you can curate and design social cues. So for instance, where you're blading, where you're moving your torso. So we tend to blade towards things that we like, or we look towards things that we like, or we point towards things that we want to draw attention to. All of these things can be used to direct attention online. And also to distract.
And you said some were like, if you go to a site and you might see a verification, or you might see someone with a celebrity, maybe I have a problem with that, with all my guests here and all of their pictures. I was thinking of what you said about my site, and I have all of these famous people on the front of my site. So I guess I'm doing that subconsciously or consciously. Well,
they're cues, they're authority cues. You're kind of saying, look at the people that I have the pleasure of connecting with. And that can be a really good thing.
I sound like a simpleton. Okay.
No, not at all. I think when you have these wonderful connections with people, it's great to be able to say, look at the people I'm interested in, because also it reveals a lot about you, and it reveals stuff to people who are looking to connect with you. So it's not a bad thing. I think it's a good thing.
But you should watch out as well, because some sites are specifically designed for that.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Is that something we should avoid? Is that something we should be prepared? Just like you would be prepared in a dangerous situation if you went into a room, should we be like, okay, that's what they're doing, that's what they're doing, that's what they're doing? Or can that be a psychosis in itself?
Well, I mean, obviously you don't want to go sort of too far with that kind of thing. But I think the most important thing to look at with any kind of page that's designed to elicit certain responses, which is usually a call to action, like sign up so I can send you marketing materials, whatever. The question really is, do I actually want the thing that they're selling me? And then what are the real metrics for success for myself that I would judge this product by? So for instance, on a website for me, it could be, okay, if I'm looking for an A/B platform, A/B testing platform, I could say, okay, well, what are the people within my industry that I know have a good track record who endorse this product? Are they visible? Have they written testimonials that relate to my needs? If the answer is yes, then I can use that because it's kosher, so to speak. If you're going onto a website and it's just very vague, so it's things like, start living the dream now, what's the return on investment for that? You're allowing people to kind of paint in whatever that means for themselves, and then creating patterns where people get seduced quickly, but there's no sort of specific outcome. And I think those are the kinds of things where you need to sort of be a little bit more cautious about what they're promising and whether you're actually getting something concrete that's going to provide value.
Yeah, force yourself to be logical, I think. I mean, I check out guests all the time, including you. And so I'm always looking at videos or websites, and I always say, for good or bad, your website is you only get one chance to make a first impression. And online, that's your website or your latest YouTube video. And so, if it's really good, you obviously make an impression. That doesn't mean you're really good. Let's talk about video quick. I mean, and what's on the cutting edge of these, if these companies have like some skunk works in the basement and they're like, oh man, this is going to be great. Obviously, video and streaming video is becoming huge on Facebook, almost to an annoying sense. I try to stay off the time on Facebook. I do a good job, actually, because I find it's like watching the show Cops in America. Every time I watch it, I feel like a bad person. So, but it's streaming now, and it's video, and it's autoplay, and like that is, it's YouTube's kind of looking out now because Facebook's getting deep into video. Is this a new concern for you? Something that they are going to use in different ways? What do you see here?
Well, I think a couple of things that you've pulled up on really quickly. The fact that they autoplay, the peripheral system is kind of wired to pick up movements, and it grabs our attention. So that's a perfect way of saying to people, look at this, we want you to engage. And if you start looking at things like Vine, it's a very short clip that gets your attention going. It's a promise of a very short window of time, so it's very low commitment. It's a very easy action to take. Videos are persuasive because they most closely resemble the kind of interactions that we have. And I think whereas we used to see a trend towards shorter videos and attention spans diminishing, it's interesting because with shows like this, when you get diving deeper into things, you find that there is a huge market for people wanting to dive deeper and get longer knowledge. And it's the same thing with articles. So I think it's going to be interesting to see which of those types of videos work for different kinds of content, different kinds of needs and platforms also.
They're also viral. I mean, they're also homemade. They also look homemade and viral on Facebook. And maybe that's just the ranking system, or people post their own videos, but sometimes it looks like they're created that way. And like the modern discerning eye knows that. Like if it's a commercial for toothpaste, we'll be like, oh yeah. But when it's not, it's almost more interesting because it looks this whole behind the scenes thing. Like I got a GoPro there that's behind all the lights and the cameras, and people love to see that.
Yeah.
And on the New York Times did an interview with President Obama, and the beginning of the interview was the shot behind all the lights in the White House. And 60 Minutes does the same thing. And so,
because people want that kind of intimacy. They want to know what's going on. And we're sick and tired at some level of being given this kind of glossed up version of reality. This whole thing with photoshopping a couple of weeks ago with older women being portrayed in fashion media. Like there comes a point at which self-esteem and constantly seeing glossed images takes a bit of a battering, and people kind of want something a little bit different.
So they go the other way. Do you think all of these short form videos will ultimately push people the other way in a bigger way to long form content? Do you think we'll be so fed up and with all these little attention grabbers that subconsciously we'll be like, I want to have a deep conversation?
I don't know. I mean, that's a very interesting question to ask, mostly because we're hoping. It's really easy. If you want that little hit, it's like, if I want a treat and I'm a bit hungry, I'll go for the chocolate. It's easy. When you're kind of a bit depleted, you know that you've got something like BuzzFeed that does this marvelously. You need a bit of distraction in your day. You give yourself 10 minutes, off you go, have a bit of fun, and then you get on with work.
That's weak. You need to discipline yourself.
Well, also, it gives me a little bit of a break from thinking, so then I can think creatively, whatever. But it's that relationship of, well, how do we manage this kind of relationship? Is it something that's positive or negative? Is it overrunning my life, or is it something that's actually providing some benefits? So it's kind of reframing it and seeing what it's giving you versus what it's not giving you, and then choosing how to interact with these things, as opposed to just being sort of, just clicking unconsciously without thinking.
Yeah, that's why it's good to try turning off for a while, for a weekend, for a week, and then just try to re-examine your habits as you go back in, and maybe you'll cut off a lot of, because it does accumulate. You end up just getting these little bad habits and things. Let's talk about men and women on the web as far as the way websites and interactive experiences are designed for each separate sex and how they behave differently. Can you give us like some basics on that?
Yeah, so there's some really interesting research around gender differences, but what's particularly fascinating, I think, with that is that we tend to think in the West that gender is binary, that there are two genders. First of all, there's a spectrum. And secondly, there's a lot more variance within a gender, so from one woman to the next, to the next, to the next, than between the genders, so between men and between women. But you also get a cultural layer of difference. So for instance, if you take cultures that are, according to Hofstede's work, he's this chap that did 40 years of research into cultural differences, kind of like personality traits for countries. One of the things that he looks at, he calls masculinity versus femininity, and that's about the roles that genders take within a society. So a typically masculine culture would have very distinct gender roles. So for instance, Russia, I think, is quite high for that. And so in that sort of society, you could expect to see, probably through socialization, quite different patterns of use. So for instance, if women within a culture are perceived to be the primary caregivers, their linguistic skills are perhaps more enhanced than the men, then the ways in which to interact with those women will be aligned with the motivations that they have. So around things like social cohesion, it might be about finding the right words to get them persuaded to take a particular action, so looking at the copy. It might be using more image-based material and then tweaking what it is that you depict for those people. But I think the trap is to kind of take this binary approach where you go, right, this is going to work better than this one. Because oftentimes it's actually the things that you think might work, you realize after testing don't necessarily work for everyone.
Are the big corporates now like designing separate pages though for genders? If they have that one metric, will they be putting up? They must be.
I haven't seen gender-specific metrics, but I have seen companies like, I talk about this in the first book with Coca-Cola, they design country-specific pages. So you might find that, you know, the branding, the color is always there, but for a company, say, a company page, say, for instance, China, the UX is going to be very different. The layout is going to be different. Or in Japan, there's going to be a lot more content on the page. It's a lot more, for a Western sort of perspective, it looks a lot more haphazard. But they might look at our pages and say, well, actually, that looks really sparse. So I haven't seen any gender-specific targeting. I've seen more of the cultural stuff, and we're starting to see a little bit more personalized searches, results based on personality, which is an area that's starting to gain some ground.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about sex. It's a powerful human emotion. It's been used since the beginning of time in advertising, I'm sure. It used to be used in a very basic way. How is that used? I mean, are we being manipulated, or is it just part of the bargain when there's any kind of social interaction? How is that being used on the web to get us to do things?
Well, there's some research that I was reading up on this morning that found that if you show, and this is a sample of men, I'm sure it would probably also apply to women, but something one would have to test, that when shown images, sexualized images of women, men made more impulsive decisions for, I think it was for financial investments, than when not shown images of sexual images of women. And also the other thing they found in the study was that our perception of time shifts. So for people who have been showed something sexual, the space of time feels like it's longer. So you're going to act in a more impatient way because it feels like there's longer between now and your gratification. So there is research to suggest that sex interferes with decision making. There's also some other interesting research that found that women who wear red, when men see these women who wear red, they get perceived as more fertile, as more attractive. So there are all these kind of subconscious things that you can do, or if you realize that you're wearing red because perhaps maybe you're ovulating, that are cues that we don't even recognize at a conscious level that will influence our actions.
Okay, and like the beer commercials and stuff have been using this for a long time in a really basic way. But I mean, are websites using that in various ways? Because I don't remember seeing a lot of women when I go to these sites, but are there other subtle things going on?
Well, if we move from sort of sex to gender, there is a really interesting study that was done a few years ago by a colleague of mine. His name is Craig Sullivan, and he's a conversion rate optimizer, fantastic guy. And they did a study with Autoglass in Germany. And what they found was when they used images of men, so promoting Autoglass, which is like a car repair company, that actually there were very few women that were coming through, either applying for jobs or becoming clients. And what was really weird was, based on the test that they ran, when they got a woman who actually worked for Autoglass, so she wasn't, she's friendly looking, smiling, but she wasn't kind of like the skinny photoshopped model, they suddenly had a huge number more women applying either for jobs or to become clients or customers, just because there's that sense of friendliness. And this is something that's been replicated across different sites, that actually women and men tend to trust women more when it comes to sales.
What does that say about us men?
Well, and women as well. Like, why do we all trust women? It's very strange.
That's true. What's the future that you look out for as far as, a dangerous technology? Maybe we shouldn't talk about it that way, but we see Google Glass and we see potential Oculus Rift and these kind of virtual reality things. Is there something that's like a big red light for you when we're, I don't know, ultra connected, or there's a new medium of communicating? Is there something that sticks out?
For me, it's the idea of something that's already, I'll give a better example. So the idea of maybe retinal. So rather than having technology that is outside of our bodies when we become implanted, and we're already seeing these things happen. So for instance, brain-to-brain communication, it's something that's already here. The beginnings of are already here. And I think when you get to a point where you're talking about nanotechnology or wearable tech that sits within your person, within your body, and maybe, years down the line, how you start collecting maybe electrical impulses in the brain that then gives rise to being able to construct consciousness. This is all sci-fi stuff. You can tell I'm a sci-fi fan, but it's not outside of the realm of possibility. And I think there's a lot of questions around, again, who owns the data, what consciousness might be, what personhood is, what is it to be human. And I have no idea where I stand on those things yet, but I think the thing that's really important to get right is the transparency aspect, making it really obvious to people what it is they're signing up for, and also opt-in, making it really clear that they have to choose a particular sort of scenario rather than just having it happen de facto.
Okay, cool. If you want to know more about consciousness, you can visit some of our episodes in the first year because we delve deep into that. I want to ask you about mobile. They said there's this new pattern where you get kind of a phantom feeling in your leg as if your phone's vibrating. And I've actually got it before.
Yeah.
And I'm super smart and I know that doesn't work. But I've had it before and I'm like, are you kidding me? And I think my phone is vibrated and I'm better than that. But how does the mobile device change? Well, it can change everything, doesn't it? Because I've heard you talk about this. Now we're carrying it around. It's almost like a maternal thing. And you used to see the old Simpsons, you would see Lisa Simpson hugging the television sometimes at the end of the show. And it was like said a lot about, our relation with children and media. But we're kind of doing the same with our mobiles now, right? So tell me, what's your read on that?
Well, again, maybe it's because I'm too future-facing, but the fact that it is carried really close to our bodies, that we play with it, we stroke it. I mean, these sort of actions that you see people exhibit with other humans or with pets,
or kittens,
and it's or kittens, taking it to that extreme. And it's also the thing that stores all of our information. It's a tracking device. If you're interested in more of that stuff, Jeff White, who's a guy who does the tech stuff at Channel 4, paired up recently with a guy called Glenn Wilkinson, who's a hacker. And they talk about the secret life of your mobile phone. So when you walk around in the street, of course you're using it to check where you're going to go. So on Yelp or Foursquare or Google Maps or Citymapper, or when you're using Uber, or when you're checking into location on Facebook, on Twitter, if you've not kind of removed the location data from being uploaded automatically. We're kind of relying on it to organize our lives. It's kind of like a personal PA. But in doing that, we're kind of sending out all of these packets all of the time, not just to the companies that we've signed up to, but also the ones that are buying data packets from them and then selling that on. And that's an area that I don't know too much about, but these guys do, but it's absolutely insane. The amount of information that you send out every single second from your phone, even when it's by itself, not doing anything, to companies on the other end of the world that you've never even heard of. That's pretty shocking.
Yeah, check your settings on your phone and you can see like all these apps collecting information. I remember before the latest iPhone, I had a torch app, the app that would just turn the light on so you could see in the dark. And then I checked it one time and it was sending like all my info out. And I was like, no wonder it's free. It is kind of creepy that way.
Yeah, and everything that is free is sending out your data. As a rule of thumb, that's a good one to use, just to assume, because usually it's the case.
Right, but now a mobile is like an appendage. I mean, people don't want going a day without a mobile is probably inconceivable to people in the Western world right now. Is that healthy?
Well, I think the question with is it healthy is, does it improve your well-being and does it serve your goals? And that's something that I'm really interested in, the idea of using technology as a tool or being used by technology as a tool. So every single tool that we've created since the dawn of man, so being able to use fire to cook food or to create smoke signals, have typically been harnessed with an intention or created with an intention. But what's interesting is that as we develop, that original intention can get superseded by others. So for instance, email, the reason that email exists is for communication. However, it's kind of hijacking our autonomy with push notifications by demanding attention because it plays on a system in the brain that seeks that reward. So you can say, okay, like Tim Ferriss, am I going to use this technology by giving myself a window and that's it? Or am I going to be constantly reacting to the needs of this technology by just handing over control? Yeah.
What's your read on the major social media platforms? Let's go through them. Okay. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Hopefully they're not your clients. What is your read on them? Instagram's an interesting one because it's grown so big. I think they just announced it's got more users than Twitter. We use Twitter a lot because we push a lot of info out, not necessarily pictures out. And so I haven't made a full adoption over there, although we are on Instagram if you want to check us out. What do you see in a media platform like that? What do you see as kind of like red flags, or this is kind of what's going on, or this is changing? Tell me.
The biggest red flag for me on Instagram was highlighted last year sometime when there was a guy that said, I think it was a website that said something like, I know where your cat lives. I can't remember the exact URL, but basically this guy had gotten a series of images of cats and had created on a map where these cats lived. Essentially what he was saying was, based on the metadata from this image that I can find if I just open it up as a text file, I can tell exactly where you took this picture. Now this is stuff that happens, it's geolocation, geotagging really, of the image that you upload that anyone who knows how to access, and it's very easy to access, can get. So in terms of surveillance, for stalkers, for people who want to sell you things, it's super easy to access this information. And that's something that most of us don't know about or not, we're not familiar with. The other thing with things like Instagram is that one has to be careful of, I'm kind of painting quite a bleak picture here, is the way in which we use it in terms of copyrighted stuff. So do we send out images? Do we not? The recent issue with Charlie Hebdo and everyone sort of creating new pieces of artwork, hardly any of these people got paid when their cartoons were appropriated by the media channels. Why? Because their first layer of propagation were through social media sites, social networking sites. So there's an issue around the value of the thing that's been created. And usually when you look at any of these free websites, you're waiving your right to ownership of that content by signing up to their terms and conditions. On the other hand, it's a great tool for citizen journalism, for expressing yourself, for being more creative. So there are lots of positives. It's just we have to kind of balance those and shift it towards where it serves us better.
Okay, next, Twitter. What's your read on that? And is it changing? Is it going to be with us? I mean, we're microblogging, so it is very different, right? And it has a cultural difference. It's been around for a long time.
Twitter is my own personal favorite, so I'm really rather biased. Okay. I think what's really interesting with Twitter is there seem to be sort of several different ecosystems that exist at the same time. So on the one hand, you've got the platform that's used for trolling, which can be absolutely horrendous, and people can, in a very brief period of time, be very reactive, hide behind anonymity, which creates what psychologists call de-individuation, which is the idea of not really feeling like you are accountable necessarily for one's actions. So there's that side of things, which is not that great. But by and large, Twitter is brilliant, not only for disseminating information once you've identified a source that you find credible, like journalists, but also for bringing people together. So for instance, some research has shown that in the wake of a tragedy, not only does it help people to mobilize and find out before the newscasters get there where the issues are, but also it can kind of help mitigate against certain things like post-traumatic stress disorder or feelings of victimhood, because people feel like there's a movement that they can coalesce around, like in Paris, Je suis Charlie. Suddenly everyone has a common language around which to enter into this discourse, to support one another. A means through which we've never seen that kind of thing happen prior to Twitter, right. Really. So it's a very exciting platform.
That's a good read on that. That's fascinating. Facebook, where is it going, and how is it now? Is it going to be a huge part of the conversation in the future?
Given that utility tends to sort of trump privacy concerns and security concerns, I would say that yes. I've actually come off Facebook because I don't agree with most of the dark patterns that they use, and they terms and conditions are constantly changing, and I don't agree with them, but it's a platform that provides a lot of utility for millions of people, and I think as such, it does have a future, and people still are using it, even if you're saying, well, I'm just going to lurk. I've got lots of friends now who say, oh no, I don't use it just to keep in touch with people. It's like, well, everything gets monitored, everything gets used, and if you're thinking about it in terms of a database, not just for personality research, but for figuring out who's related to who, and it's a minefield of information.
I was reading an article recently about some of Zuckerberg's acquisitions, and he acquired like a multi-channel network in the U.S., which is like kind of a YouTube network, but it wasn't one of the top ones. It was like a top 3. And then they made another acquisition of some like online content, and they could say that they were stitching them together so they could see how people were performing on different platforms. And you might not be able to follow a user, but you could follow like a user type, and then you could see what they were doing in all these areas. And I was like, Jesus, these are some smart people. And they were mining now other forms, not just the Facebook stuff, and correlating it. So I was like, wow, it's impressive, or scary. And is there anything else in the running? Google Plus, thoughts on that, or YouTube, or the Google platform, as far as like a social media or a way of pulling information? Do you see that as something? We talked about Google now as a threat, or something that's going to be more prominent or less prominent?
Google Plus, I'm not entirely sure. The adoption was slow. People are using it. But I think the fact with a lot of this technology, especially with what Google did, was to kind of link it automatically to all the YouTube accounts, for instance, which pissed a lot of people off. It pissed me off.
And then they got over it.
And then people get over it. Because, again, it's utility. Utility trumps everything else, typically. If it's easy and I don't have to think, then I'm just going to carry on doing it, which is the same reason that dark patterns work on websites. It's all checked for you, and sort of unchecking and opting out is harder than just getting on with it as it's portrayed. I'm not entirely sure how Google is going to keep moving forward. I mean, there's a lot of calls at the moment through things like the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and apps that you can use like Adblocker or Ghostery or MaskMe that interfere with some of the sort of the data collecting and ad showing systems of the Google network. So, for instance, I've got Adblocker, and it stops me from seeing any kind of targeted ads. So there are ways of kind of messing with the system, and I don't know how or if Google are going to calibrate around that, or how they'll get better adoption, or if they'll end up rolling out a paid-for service where those who are willing to pay a premium will still have the utility of their fantastic suite of services, because they are really useful and amazing, but without having to give up their data.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't see that happening. And think of all the great ads you're missing by opting out. All those customized ads. Last question, Snapchat and WhatsApp and stuff, we're seeing these, really become, powerful forces in their own. I don't use Snapchat. I'm not cool enough, not young enough. But, WhatsApp, I'm kind of seeing it, and there's kind of groups on WhatsApp, and I know families keep it together. I mean, that's weird, because that's less of a, that platform can manipulate your mind less, you would say, because it's more basic and it's not necessarily as visual. What do you see when you see these things propagating and getting big?
Well, I think the issue really that they're playing it well. Yeah, the issue is that we don't seem to be able to plan very well, generally speaking, for the future. So humans, again, another bias, we tend to plan for what's immediate. So what's going to happen to me in a year or 2 years' time? It's why it's hard getting people to, put money into a pension unless they're very conscientious, because it's something that affects a future self that we've got no real emotional connection with. The same thing with data collection with WhatsApp. Oh, it's amazing, I'm going to use it now, it's kind of fun. But actually, when that data is being collected over a period of time, what are the implications going to be? Over 10, 15, 13, whatever years you want to think. And I think because people aren't thinking far ahead, because it's a very immediate form of communication, we're not even conscious of the implications that they might have for good or for bad. And I think it's useful to think about these things so that we can steer it towards good. So we can say, well, this is really useful, let's keep the utility, but maybe we need to bring in some ethical considerations. In sort of the kind of hacker community, there's a fantastic platform that is encrypted. Shouldn't be saying this with the British government kind of raging against it, but it's called PQ Chat, which is post-quantum chat, and it is fully encrypted. And you've got, Silent Circle, these phones that are used that are encrypted as well. So there is definitely a need for it, and there's more of a debate going around. Yeah, but I think because they're so easy to use and they do connect people, and that's one of our strongest urges as humans, they are going to proliferate.
Yeah, the digital footprint argument is fascinating, because I have this theory that in 10 or 20 years, we're all going to have such dirty footprints. It'll be who has the least dirty. So, because you go into the job interview, they'll be like, well, we caught you smoking weed. And they'll be like, well, half of America is smoking weed. And I was saying to someone, also President Obama is actually a fascinating case study, because he wrote in his book that, he did cocaine and smoked marijuana. And once he wrote the book about it, everything was fine. So I use that as an example with some guest on my show, really smart person, and they said, yeah, but do you have a Vine video of him doing the coke? He said, that is what won't get him elected, not just the story of it. And I was like, that's a really good point. So so I don't know the future of that. And then now, if NSA is storing all this information, I can go further down the rabbit hole. I mean, they might have information on everyone. And now that you're running for political office and you're getting close, all of a sudden information is leaked, or, sexting pictures are leaked. And then, it's
just so easy.
Yeah, it gets kind of J. Edgar Hoover, and then it gets, I guess, scary. So, well, that's why you're here, right? And to tell us, you talk about, Carol Riff's 6 core dimensions of well-being. Why are these relevant to what you do? And can you just walk us through some of these things? Yeah. Should I list them just so people know? Let me go.
Sure,
Self-acceptance, autonomy, positive relations with others, purpose in life, environmental mastery, and personal growth. Fascinating. You sound like one of our guests. Was it Daniel Pink, who talked about what people really want in life, and it wasn't just money. It was 3 things in the work. It was like mastery, autonomy, and purpose. That's what he said. They didn't want more money, which is everyone just assumes. Tell me about these things.
So Carol Riff is fascinating. She's a doctor of psychology at Pennsylvania State University, and she's dedicated many years of her life and her research exploring different aspects of well-being. And what was interesting was that up until she created this scale, there was a lot of interesting research around, optimal living, around well-being, and it wasn't until she came along and created these 6 factors, really, that there was something solid to look at. In terms of bringing all this prior research together. So the reason that I'm interested in this right now is because it provides us with a lens through which to assess whether certain aspects of our behavior or certain platforms are empowering us to reach our potential or diminishing that ability. It's very early stages in the new book, but if we look at something like, for instance, environmental mastery, so we'll take a bit of a grey idea. So something like Google Maps or Citymapper, both of which I use, both of which I love. On the one hand, the utility is great because it allows me to get to places quickly. On the other hand, it's going to track where I'm going in life, and so that's kind of like, well, does it increase my environmental mastery, but then maybe decrease my autonomy, because what can be done with that data once it goes further down the line? So I think in terms of using it as a model through which to assess our own behaviors and say, is this helping or hindering my ability to become a fuller, more self-actualized person, that's where this sort of stuff comes in really handy.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of some of those cognitive biases and kind of knowing yourself and what is ultimately important to you, and then kind of watching yourself. I remember I read this book, and it made the analogy that a human is like a rider on an elephant. And so, when the elephant really wants to go somewhere, there's nothing you can do about it. But if you can, train the elephant, you can show it some guidance. And that's how I feel about like mastery of self. And I find if I do certain things, like if I make sure I meditate and I train hard and I do some of these other things, then I can stay in control of the brain. But if I don't, then it starts doing crazy things. And we won't talk about those. Let's just finish with your book. What can we expect? I can tell you're a writer now wrestling with yourself. Tim Ferriss says that writing a book is one of the most isolating times in his life. He's like, nobody would want to do it. I've heard other people say, yeah, writing the book is easy, but rewriting it is the horrible part. And so getting back to Tim, they said, when's your next book? And he's like, well, when's my next time where I isolate myself from the rest of the world for 12 months in a horror state? He's like, I'm not looking forward to it. Is it that bad?
It's interesting hearing you say that. Look at my body language. I'm like, oh God.
You can't lie on camera.
No. Well, okay. So no, I'm not going to lie about it. It is isolating. And the thing that I find, I don't have horror around it, but I get bloody bored. I get really bored because I'm very sociable. And I like understanding things deeply, but I'm also quite impatient. So this kind of, what I find difficult, at least initially, is kind of making myself sit at my desk and go through the really boring stuff of organizing the research, deciding where things fit together, finding the relationships. Because as a web psychologist, basically what I do is take the research that other people have done that is inaccessible most of the time, and I try and find the patterns and the ways in which they're applicable to us so that we can use this stuff that otherwise we wouldn't have access to. And with this book, it's a question of figuring out what's going to be most useful for people, but then also how they connect to well-being so that there's something really tangible that we can take away, whilst not getting distracted by the interesting stuff. Like one of my chapters is going to be on sex, relationships, and pornography. There is an entire book that you can write about that. But it's kind of not allowing myself to get completely sidetracked. So getting over the boredom, making sure I actually do the groundwork, which is the boring stuff, and then trying not to get sidetracked too much. They're my top 3 issues with writing.
Is there a name for the book?
Not yet.
Do we know when it's coming out?
Not yet.
Okay. We both know, or we're both friends with our recent guest, Jamie Bartlett. I was just curious if some of the topics that he talks about, which is kind of humanizing some of the darker aspects of the web, which we tend to stereotype. I guess that's a pretty good summary. Whether that's, the neo-Nazi guy or the pedophilia guy or the webcam porn girl or all these different types. And he dives in and tries to, I guess, either humanize or understand their stories. Is there anything that you observed when he kind of wrote about those things from a psychologist point of view that was noted?
Well, you'd probably want to look at a social psychologist with a doctorate in that specific area. I'm much more interested in sort of like the design and intersection between that and behaviors. But personally, what I noticed from some of the work that he did was how, when you look at the journeys of the people whose stories he kind of writes about in the book, it seems as though many of these people kind of ended up in a place by taking incremental steps. So it's not like suddenly you wake up and you end up being in a fringe group, or you end up being a webcam girl. It's kind of, there's all these other stories that eventually you've taken one step and then the next and then the next to end up in this particular place. I think often what you observe in groups is that when we kind of shun people who are in other groups, it's to sort of shore up a sense of preservation around ourselves, of identity, of comfort. And I think often, and certainly what Jamie shows, it's not as black and white. And actually, kind of having a bit more information and having a sense of empathy can help understand the motivations behind what led that person to get to that place. And I found that particularly interesting in Jamie's books, of kind of blowing it open and saying, well, actually, these people are not necessarily quite as different as you.
Yeah, it's kind of like a periodization or something that he described. No, that's a fascinating observation. People following you, Twitter's the best, website the best? What's good?
Twitter, I'm at Nathalie Nahai, and then the website is thewebpsychologist.com.
Okay, good. We're going to the bonus rounds now, which is going to be, this next piece of video is going to be over at the London Real Academy. We're going to ask Nathalie a couple things, including her practice of self-talk, which is what she does, I think, every day. You've seen those people walking down the street doing that. And also about her previous music career and her video on YouTube. So we'll see you on the other side.